The views and opinions of this program are those of the host, guests, and callers. There is substantial risk of loss in trading futures and options, which you should carefully consider prior to trading. Today's episode of Market Talk is brought to you by Growmark FS. Keeping up with the latest in ag is a challenge, to say the least, but there are experts nearby ready to help. You'll find them at your local FS. You can trust them to bring you customized agronomic, grain, and energy solutions born of the latest thinking. That's because FS specialists receive continuous training that keeps them current on the latest trends, practices, and technologies. So you'll get local expertise that's both exceptional and up to date. Visit fssystem.com to learn how FS is bringing you what's next. Well, as dust settled on Tuesday's trading session after the release of the April World Agricultural Supply and Demand Estimates report from USDA, we saw the soy complex find some strength with corn and wheat under a little bit of pressure. Not many changes in that April report. Here to walk through things with us, we welcome in our good friend Matt Bennett with agmarket.net joining us here today on the show. Matt, thanks for making the time to be with us here today. Overall, kind of a ho-hum report day. I think a lot of folks anticipated that. This April report's usually not a very eventful one, Matt.
Yeah, I mean, you get past that March report. Typically, this April report's kind of I don't even know if we want to pay attention to it type thing, because May is when we get the new balance sheet to come in and kind of get what you would call a more interesting set of numbers. I mean, but with that being said, quarterly stocks numbers this year basically showed that we had a lot less, a noticeable amount less corn and soybeans than what we thought. A lot of times that March report, you come in with more stocks than what you think. That's not what the case was this year. So most of us assumed they'd have to make some adjustments as far as demand was concerned, first of all. And second of all, what carryout ended up being. So I was kind of surprised, quite frankly. I think just as surprising to me is that they were as aggressive as they were, with Argentine soy production, taking it all the way down to 27. Usually USDA doesn't get as aggressive maybe as what they were today, but it was an interesting report, I think, more so due to that than the fact that they punted as far as the U.S. balance sheet was concerned.
Well, and you brought up the Argentine numbers. I have to think that was some of the strength in soybeans and meal on the day, as that cut, larger than we expected. I figured there was going to be a cut, but to your point, I didn't think they would cut 6 million down to 27 million metric tons. I think it just goes to show the seriousness of the lack of a soybean crop in Argentina, Matt.
Yeah, I think the way the trade looks at it is that the USDA typically isn't going to be that aggressive. And so if they're that aggressive, then I guess there's maybe an assumption that it could even come down more. But I mean, if you stop and look at it, you come down 6 million tons. Last month was 8 million tons. We know imports of soybeans into Argentina over a 2-month period are going to be forecasted to be up 14 million tons. Why? Because they're not going to lose any of that soybean meal export business that they, are so fond of, and that they're as proud of as what they are. I mean, that's the calling card, if you will, out on the world market. So, you've got to assume that they're going to be out there hunting soybeans. What's that mean? 14 million tons of beans that Brazil might ship to someone else are going to be shipped to their neighbor, and so that kind of gives you the opportunity, as far as the U.S. is concerned, maybe see some of that export business kind of flow into you. And so, it's not such a bad thing for us, especially at a time when people say, oh, we're going to be importing Brazilian soybeans. Well, I don't know. That world balance sheet at 100 million tons, it's interesting to me, that you just continue to ratchet down production, and then you just say, well, demand's going to disappear. I mean, essentially, I don't know. I think it'll be interesting moving forward. I think what you see is tight stocks for both U.S. and world. Maybe the world stocks aren't being portrayed, as much as what the U.S. is, but it's still going to be a pretty tight situation for the time being, even with a huge Brazilian crop.
Well, and another thought, you mentioned the domestic numbers, really no changes there. And that soybean side, I think a lot of folks anticipated we might fall below that 200 mark, and we didn't do it. No change there. So to that point, Matt, I know we're kind of the market psychology shifting more towards weather here. It's that time of year. So one has to wonder if this soybean crop, maybe just this market stays range bound here until we see what we get in the ground in the U.S. What's your thought there, Matt?
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's hard to expect much in the way of a rally with planters rolling.
Yeah.
Typically, when planters are rolling, everyone makes the assumption, oh, if they're going early, then that means that we're planting into great conditions and we should have the chance, to be, laying the table for a potentially large crop. And so I guess from my thought process, I've thought the path of least resistance would probably be lower. It wasn't surprising to me that you saw corn moving lower on the day. There's a lot of talk and chatter about, some corn planters starting to roll. I haven't started yet, but I will be planting within probably the next 24 hours as far as corn's concerned, whereas we're already planting a few soybeans here today. So, yeah, I think in central Illinois, it's no secret that producers typically, once one guy gets going in the township, everyone is pinning their ears back to get as much in the ground as they possibly can. And that's kind of what we're looking at a lot of different places, especially, like from up into Decatur, into the Bloomington area, any area that missed some of those rains. I'll tell you what, you're seeing a lot of folks rolling right now, and I think that's going to provide some headwinds, at least for the time being. With that being said, you're still looking at a tight situation, so I don't know if people are going to want to just pile on and sell the heck out of these commodities. But one thing we've told our producers, as far as new crops concerned, especially on corn, is that you could see the balance sheet shift a little bit. If this spring planting window gives you the opportunity to actually plant 92 million acres. I guess the assumption is that you're going to see stocks at a totally different situation for new crop than what it was for old. And that's a pretty safe assumption right now.
Well, I know to your point about planters rolling, I pretty much said for sure along and south of Interstate 80, I think we're going to see a rapid move this week, maybe even as far north as Interstate 90 in some areas. Just depends. I've still got some snowpack to get rid of course, in the northern plains. But thinking about planters rolling, getting that corn in the ground, getting those beans in the ground, Matt, I look at the corn market. I look at old crop 650, new crop 550-ish. I mean, is that pretty much a reasonable target, do you think, here until we get planting done? Is that do you think that's where this corn market could hold right now?
I think with old crop, one thing I've noticed, Jesse, and things that we keep hearing is some pretty strong basis pushes in some areas. I'm talking, I heard one particular elevator was bidding 32 over, and they actually offered up some to a couple of producers if they could provide quantity at 62 over. And so a 30-cent push over posted bid. We're hearing that here and there. Now, those aren't posted bids that you're going to see out there. What that is someone's in a pinch and they know that they don't really want everyone and their brother knowing that they need corn, so to speak. And so they call a couple of guys that's got 500,000 bushels sitting on the farm, say, hey, or an elevator system, call them and say, hey, we'll push for quantity. And I think that's something you're going to see. Now, with that being the case, I'm not bullish up here at these areas, but at the same time, I do think cash ownership of corn, and in soybeans in certain regions, could be quite the feather in a person's cap. Now, that doesn't mean that you thumb your nose at $6.50 to $7 corn. I mean, in my ball game or in my world, that's a major money maker, and so do I want to hold on to a few bushels, see how this plays out? Yeah, I mean, call it gambling bushels, call it what you want. I guess what I'm getting at, Jesse, is I don't think we're going to fall completely out of bed whenever it comes to cash ownership. Now, if my bushels were in the elevator, they're not worth as much as what they are at home. And that's the unfortunate reality, is that, someone already has a hold of the physical bushels. I think in some of these areas, people are going to be hunting big time for corn, especially moving forward, especially when you get farther west. So it's going to be interesting. As far as new crops concerned, I could see us just kind of hanging out for the time being. What's going to happen in the northern plains? Are we going to see any prevent plant? If we don't see any prevent plant, then I've got to think that 550 to 570 corn going to look pretty good this fall. But if you plant 90 or below, it could be a pretty exciting market again.
We are having a conversation today with Matt Bennett of agmarket.net. Matt, you mentioned the Northern Plains. We obviously know there is a deep snowpack up there, starting to melt that off here this week. And of course, that's going to bring a flooding concern. I look at the April WASDE numbers, though. A lot of changes, a lot of shifting between wheat classes with the numbers, including a jump in spring wheat stocks, durum stocks. I just have to wonder, to your point about, prevent plant, et cetera. It feels like maybe Did USDA get a little ahead of its skis with that number till we see what happens in the northern plains with planting?
I would sure think so, and you look at the total acreage, 50 million acres essentially of wheat, 92 corn, 87 and a half beans. I feel like they're making some pretty lofty assumptions that prevent plants not really going to be much of an issue this year. I think any year, especially with the kind of snowpack we've had this year in that part of the world, it's pretty tough to ask that ground to be able to heal up and dry out quick enough for them to be able to feel good enough about planting in time to not worry about frost or freeze event previous to harvest. And so, it's going to take a good 2 or 3 weeks for most of those folks to even be in the realm of being able to think about doing anything. So, who knows what the weather's going to do between now and then. We actually had Eric Snodgrass on ours as well on our webinar yesterday. And so, he was just saying he expects another storm system to come through with some snow once again. But the interesting thing is there's parts of Nebraska today, they're like 90 degrees. I mean, it's just a really strange situation as far as weather's concerned up front. I think the biggest things, that I took from Eric is that, how quickly are we going to get into an El Nino? Because if we do get in to an El Nino, then I've got to think that we've got a fighting chance at a trendline yield. And if trendline yield at 92 is a totally different story than, so let's just say, a 175 at 90. That's probably $1 difference as far as the price of corn is concerned. So Mother Nature is going to play a very, very large role moving forward. We know we're a just-in-time delivery world, where people want to take stocks as low as they could possibly take them, and then figure out the rest later. Figuring out the rest later might not be a whole lot of fun if we can't get as many acres planted as what the USDA has been suggesting.
Well, and thinking about those spring wheat acres too, if we don't get the acres planted they're suggesting, I look at the winter wheat condition ratings, tied for the lowest ratings in 40 years. I mean, it's not looking good for the winter wheat crop, especially in Kansas. If you couple that with less spring wheat acres, what does that do to this wheat market? Which then in turn, what does that do to maybe being a leadership role for quarter beans? I know it's a lot of what ifs, but there's a lot of storylines there in this wheat market I think bear watching, Matt.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I have a hard time getting super bearish, right now, considering what we're looking at as far as weather is concerned. But yet wheat just seems pretty sick right now too. So, I think that wheat looked at the numbers today and said, oh, well, if the USDA thinks everything's okay, we think everything's okay as well. I'm not totally sure that all traders totally agree with that. I think moving forward, I think there's probably a lot of hesitancy to take short positions, even though historically prices aren't exactly bad. I mean, if we're totally honest about it. So, I think it's going to be very interesting moving forward. Does the West heal up? Do we see, a fair amount of abandonment? Because I've had people tell me, well, we may go ahead and abandon acres and go and plant to something else. Well, why are you abandoning them? You're abandoning them because it's so freaking dry that you don't think you can raise a crop. So, let's just throw some more money into another crop. I mean, that's not going to happen if the weather doesn't improve in that part of the world. So it'd be very interesting. I mean, I feel for those folks. I mean, we have several clients in that part of the world, and it's just they haven't been able to catch a ray of sunshine, so to speak, for quite some time. I mean, we need to see some wholesale change in the weather, especially in that western third of Kansas, because it's just way too dry out there.
Well, that's also part of feedlot country as well. Let's talk cattle trade. This cattle market just on fire, Matt. I've heard some sale barn news, feeders, parts of Nebraska even last week going 280 plus, even some 302. I mean, this market's just on fire right now, Matt.
Yeah. And as you know, I've been fairly bullish cattle for quite some time here. And the thing, I'm not patting myself on the back. I'm just saying the fundamentals tell me that there's just no way around it, that you're going to see pretty lofty prices. And a couple of weeks ago, I was on Market to Market, and I said, I think you'll see 175, 180 fat cattle on the board, this year. We've already seen 175 fats in certain places. As far as the cash market's gone, the market got hotter than a firecracker last week. You see this week, there's more enthusiasm kind of steps in here. So, let's just say that this corn market is stagnant to lower. If the equities market holds together like it has been, I'll tell you what, Jesse, 180 may be too low. I know that sounds crazy to some people, but I do think you'll see $200 fat cash cattle. I think that you'll see that in the next 12 months. I don't know if it's going to happen by the end of the calendar year, but this is a futures market. And so I think you'll run this market a little bit higher than what you think, a little bit earlier than what you think, because a lot of people are going to try to front run that, just looking at the fundamentals of things, and trying to make sense of what's going to happen with these markets. And so, I guess I hate to get bullish up here, but at the same time, I'll tell you what, on speculative notion, I certainly wouldn't want to be selling right now. Now if it's a hedging thing, I totally get it, and I have no issue with that. But as far as speculative, I think a person better be careful with that.
I was going to say, I mean, if we're hedging here, I would have to think getting some hedges in place, protecting the downside risk and letting that top side be open is smart business in this cattle market right now, Matt.
For sure. I like a flexible strategy, just like I do in corn and soybeans. If it's someone that's locking in, whatever, you look at, let's just take, for instance, October, you're at 167. Maybe you lock in 165 as a worst case scenario, but let yourself run, because what do you know? You might end up getting $25, $30 on top of what you already see. I know that sounds nuts, but it's certainly a possibility, because the bottom line is, if panic sets in, you're going to be getting into grilling season here, and you've already got numbers issues. There might be some folks that just get into full-on panic mode and start buying whatever they can get their hands on. If that happens, then you're going to see a run on this cattle market.
I thought maybe with the big export sales of pork and then the Easter time frame there, I thought maybe all of that Easter demand would help out this hog market. Just doesn't look like it's helping out. Is there anything good to say about this hog market right now, Matt?
I guess what you said you thought. Okay, so I'll tell you what my dad always told me. He said, you're not paid to think. And so whenever it comes to the cattle market, neither one of us are paid to think. Thank God, right? Because this hog market's just brutal. I mean, for a hog bull, so to speak, someone bullish hogs, I mean, talk about getting your lunch handed to you. But every time you think that, well, we're going to start to build a story here, and we're going to be able to start to bounce and do something fun here with this hog market, it seems like we get our lunch handed to us. So, it's just a rough go right now. I don't know that I see the light at the end of the tunnel unless it's a freight train. I don't want to be bearish down here, so to speak, but at the same time, if you're going to be bullish, you got to be pretty cautious as to how you do it. I would do so on a limited risk basis, because this hog market's got a lot of folks rooting against it right now, unfortunately.
Get rid of hogs, buy some cattle. I wish it was that easy, but
there you go.
I know it's not that easy. Matt, busy time of year in front of us here. To wrap things up, I know producers going to be going hard and fast here the next couple of weeks in many areas. And sometimes when you do that, you're so focused about getting the crop in, you lose sight of your marketing. So what would you say to folks as they're getting ready to really hit the fields, to keep in mind here as they watch the markets going over the next couple of weeks?
Yeah, there could definitely be some really good opportunities here, especially on old crop corn. I did hear about a couple of big pushes right here in my part of the world with folks over the Easter weekend. Now, I don't want to haul corn over Easter, but there might be someone who likes to drive that doesn't have family in town, on one of these weekends. And so if that's the case, keep your options open, because whenever planters are rolling, typically you get some basis pushes. So the other thing I'd say, just, let's be careful about it. I mean, I know my dad, he's 76. He helps us farm. I always tell him, when you're ready to go home and eat supper with mom, go home and do so, because this is going to be here tomorrow. Sometimes we want to run as long as what we can possibly run. With technology these days, we can certainly do all kinds of neat things, but you got to get some sleep too. So just be careful.
Good thoughts to remember. And I know, Matt, if folks want to reach out and get a little bit of advice, maybe they're in the tractor cab and they're moving along and got time for a quick phone call, I know they can reach out to the team there at agmarket.net. They can go online too. A lot of great ways to get in touch with you guys, isn't there?
Absolutely. They can get a hold of us. So just Google us if you want to, but you can definitely find us if you want to.
Yeah, agmarket.net's the best way. With that, Matt Bennett, appreciate the time, sir. Thanks for joining us, and have a safe and happy planting season here the next couple of weeks ahead.
Yep, appreciate it, bud.
That's going to do it for Market Talk. Find us online, markettalkag.com. I'm Jesse Allen. Have a great afternoon.